Omega is 40 years old this year. And I started it when I was 20, just a kid. And so that question you just asked to me is like my favorite thing to think and talk about, because nervousness about the other person is such a fascinating topic to me. When I was really young and I first started meeting these so-called, wise ones, famous people or gurus or brilliant neuroscientists, all the kind of people we bring to Omega. Of course, at first I was nervous, but one of the great privileges of working at Omega is that I've gotten to see who people really are beneath the veneer. And people will often ask me, like, what's the most important thing you've learned from all your years at Omega? And it is that no one is who you think they are. You have people on either a pedestal of greatness, or you think they're not that great. We live in this world of like, oh, they're great, I'm going to aspire to that person, or that person doesn't have what I need. And neither of those two ideas about people are true most of the time. I'd say 99% of the time, we're seeing people through these lenses of assumptions. So the great ones, the wise ones, at first I would be nervous, but I began to see, like, okay, the relationship expert was actually getting divorced for like the fourth time. Or the peace activist was like a really angry jerk, and you'd be like, wow. Or the monk, was like, the celibate monk was actually having secret affairs kind of thing, which was at first upsetting to me. And then it wasn't upsetting. It was like, oh, we're all struggling human beings. And just because we're wise doesn't mean we can live it. Or just because, let's say, when you're on Fox, which, by the way, thank you for that work. Thank you. I'm sure you've gotten to know some conservative people on Fox who you like and respect. And I'm sure you have shared with fellow liberals and discovered, ooh, I don't really like that person. I agree with their politics. So I think it's so important to come to other human beings, no matter who they are in the world, with an open, equal playing field place. Like, we're in this together. I may be older, I may have been at this longer, but hey, now, we are one in our humanity. We struggle, we wake up confused, we're unsure of ourselves. We also are sure of ourselves, and we're not confused. And that's just, let's be humans together. Let's get rid of this pedestal thing.
Hey everyone, welcome to Unscripted with Nell Daly. I'm so grateful you're back with us today. I'm your host, Nell Daly. I'm a psychotherapist, a journalist, a TV commentator, and a mother. You're listening to the 10th episode of Unscripted, which is a podcast that asks the great questions of life to some of the most profound writers and doctors, spiritual thinkers, and disruptors of our time. It's a podcast that inspires you to live a deep, meaningful life, that inspires you to wake up and live a conscious life. The voice that you've just heard was that of Elizabeth Lesser, our guest for today's show. Elizabeth Lesser is a gorgeous writer. She's also a spiritual teacher and the founder of the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. But before I formally introduce her, I want to tell you a story of how one of her books, called Broken Open, landed in my purse and stayed there for almost a year. Yes, a year. Knowing I could pull out her words, her mind, her stories really, her insight, at any time was a great source of comfort to me as I navigated through some of the darkest days of my adult life. In December 2015, just weeks before Christmas and a few days after my 40th birthday, my fiancé and I broke off our engagement, one cold Sunday morning, sitting by a fountain in Midtown Manhattan. I was very much in love with him. At the time, I was probably more in love with him than I had ever been with another man. Losing him so suddenly was, honestly, it was like the closest thing I had ever experienced to losing someone I loved from something like, let's say, a heart attack. 1 minute he was my everything. I had built my world around him, and the next minute, he was gone. All the accumulated losses I hadn't dealt with in the previous decade because I was too busy with my career and giving birth to 3 children and then sadly getting divorced came crashing down on me. For weeks, the heartbreak was so bad, my ribs felt like they were cracked in my chest. Each breath I took hurt. I hated waking up in the morning because there was that moment, and we've all had this moment before, when I first opened my eyes, that it would all sink in again. I would tell myself, this is your new normal. Surrender to it. Lean into it. But I didn't want to, because leaning into it hurt like hell. The minute after my children got on the bus in the morning, I would walk back into my house and stand by my kitchen sink and begin to cry. Quickly, I realized I wasn't just crying over him. Every day, I felt like I was sitting in the back of a church during a funeral. When you cry, not just for the person who is lying in the casket at the altar, but you cry for all the people you have lost in your life. You cry for all the people sitting around you and their collective sorrows, and you cry for the sorrows of the world. You cry because poverty and hunger and planetary destruction and war exist. I cried for my patients who had lived through 9/11 in Newtown. I cried over all the sad stories I had ever heard in my office, stories of terminal illness and lost love and financial ruin and estrangement from family. I cried for my children who now had to be shuffled back and forth between 2 homes. I cried because my mother was aging. I cried because I knew, because I'm a therapist, that the only way out of all of this pain was through. A friend said, when the pain gets so bad, you'll hit your knees in prayer and meditation. She was right. I did, which is something I had never done before. And then she sent me a stack of books. Start reading these, she said, like your life depends on it. One of those books was titled Broken Open: How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, by Elizabeth Lesser. I had never read anything like it before. First of all, Lesser is a spectacular writer, and I don't say that lightly. I actually have a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and I was an English major in college. I know beautiful writing when I see it. She belongs at the table, rubbing elbows with some of the great authors of our time. But it was the content in Broken Open that I found so mind-blowing. She blends quotes from Einstein and spiritual teachers like Ram Dass with poetry from the likes of Rumi, with stories from her own life and ones she's heard over the years, to create a guide of sorts through those times in our lives where everything feels as if it's been burned to the ground. She calls the reader to task. Will you be broken down and defeated, or broken open and transformed? Will you rise up from the ashes, from your broken open moment, stronger and more beautiful than you were before? She teaches in Broken Open the values of recognizing your dark side, not just your light, and the value of staying conscious, staying awake through loss, because there are great spiritual gifts to be learned from the times that we suffer. She ends her first chapter by saying, and I quote, "If there is one thing that has made a difference in my life, It is the courage to turn and face what wants to change within me. Every page of Broken Open is laced with golden wisdom. I believe books come into our lives like certain people do, at the exact right time, to work their loving magic and encourage us to move forward with an open heart. Broken Open is on my required life reading list. To have the honor of interviewing Elizabeth for Unscripted, let's just say it was one of the highlights of my career. If I can get her words into the hands of just one person, I've done something good for this world. So without further ado, let me formally introduce you to Elizabeth Lesser. Elizabeth Lesser is a best-selling author and the co-founder of Omega Institute, the renowned conference and retreat center located in Rhinebeck, New York. Elizabeth's first book, The Seeker's Guide, chronicles her years at Omega and distills lessons learned into a potent guide for growth and healing. Her New York Times best-selling book, Broken Open: How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, which was published by Random House, has sold more than 300,000 copies and has been translated into 20 languages. Her latest book, Marrow, A Love Story, is a memoir about Elizabeth and her sister Maggie and the process they went through when Elizabeth was the donor for Maggie's bone marrow transplant. Elizabeth co-founded the Omega Institute in 1977, a time when a variety of fresh ideas were sprouting in American culture. Since then, the Institute has been at the forefront of holistic education, offering workshops and trainings in integrative medicine, prevention, nutrition, and the mind-body connection, meditation and yoga, cross-cultural arts and creativity, spirituality, and social change movements like women's empowerment and environmental sustainability. Elizabeth is also the co-founder of the Omega Women's Leadership Center. Each year, more than 30,000 people participate in Omega's programs on its campus in Rhinebeck, New York, and at the urban and travel sites, and more than 1 million people visit its website for online learning. Elizabeth has studied with spiritual teachers and healers and psychologists and philosophers from other traditions. In 2008, she helped Oprah Winfrey produce a 10-week online seminar based on Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. In 2011, she gave a popular TED Talk called Take the Other to Lunch, which was a call for civility and understanding as we negotiate our differences as human beings. Today's episode is partially supported by Quero Shoes. This is such a great company. I have to tell you, I am so proud to be aligned with them. Let me tell you a little bit about Quero Shoes. They're handmade shoes for men and women, crafted by Spanish artisans who use only the finest materials from Italy and France and Spain. Quero has made it simple for you to buy a classic upscale shoe that is literally custom designed by you. So how do you do this? You simply go to Quero.com. That's QUEROHMS.com. And you pick out a style you love. And man, do they have some gorgeous styles to choose from. I was on their website and it's really off the hook stuff, you guys. And then you build your shoes to fit your own taste and measurements. You can pick the laces you want, the heel size, even the exact color of the leather. This is an old way to make shoes, but a new way to buy them. And if that's not enough, they even offer free shipping in the US and free returns. That's awesome. And when you sign up for their newsletter, you also get an extra 15% off with your purchase. So go to Quero.com to learn more. That's QUEROHMS.com to learn more. Is it okay to talk a little bit about Broken Open?
Absolutely.
Is that still of interest to you? You know, sometimes writers are like, oh, that's so in the rearview mirror. I can't go back there. But
you know, the great transitional human truths, the things we go through, it's never in the rearview mirror. we're never done with it. We're never done with this concept of the phoenix process, which is the ancient myth, which you actually find in many cultures. I think the first incidence is in ancient Egyptian culture, but you find the myth of the phoenix under other names in many world mythologies. But for the sake of the word phoenix, we'll go to the Egyptian myth, where this golden bird feels a change coming upon it, knows that something in its life is ended and needs to die, needs to end, and feels that resistance to letting go so that something new can be born. But in its courage to be born again, sits in a fire and is burned to nothing. And then there's this period of, where's the bird? Is it all over? And then out of the ashes, the new bird, which actually looks just like the older bird, but more radiant, is born. And it's, as all myths, it's a representation of our own lives. We go through phases. We feel something moving in us, like, is this all there is to life? Is this what it's supposed to be? And if we heed that inner call of discomfort and yearning and longing for something that expresses our truth, our soul, our life force, if we listen to it, oh no, it calls us to maybe do some risky, dangerous things, like really examine, is this job really what I want to spend the next 10, 20 years at? I think it's going to kill my soul, but hey, no. I'm not going to listen to that, because I got to make a living, and I got to pay this, that, and the other, and I have kids, or I have to pay back my student loans. Like, no, stick in it. Or a marriage. Or suddenly you feel yourself getting very ill. And all of these things can make us do one of two things. No way, I'm not listening to what my body's saying, what my job's saying, what my marriage is saying. I'm staying with it, and I'm not going to pay attention. I'm going to go back to sleep because it's too scary. And some people can spend an entire life not listening to what wants to change. And other people will say, okay, I'm going, I'm looking at it. And sometimes that calls for small changes and things get better, yay. But sometimes it calls us to actually sit in the flames and burn something dear to us. To ashes, a job, a marriage, a way we've been treating our body, an addiction, whatever. It calls it to burn it in the flames of transformation, which is never comfortable, and to wait in a period of often dismay and confusion and what comes next, and to wait until the new bird arises, which it always does. And that's where faith comes in, and prayer comes in, and meditation comes in. Please show me what's next. Please help me resurrect and not make the burning be for naught. Because often a lot of destruction comes with change. Other people get dragged into those flames with us. If it's a marriage, the ex, the children. If it's a job, all the people who depended on us, whatever. So that's what the Phoenix process is. That was a long answer.
This is why people tune in, because they're in pain, or they want to hear that voice in the dark. And that's what your book was for me. I'd sort of already been through some of the change, but when I read how you frame this voice that we hear inside of us as, you use the word longing quite a bit in all of your books. That's a really a word that you attach a lot of meaning to, and you explain why you use the word longing a lot. But I think it's a great one. And you say at one point, it's the knocking at your soul. The longing that you hear, that knocking at your soul. Mm-hmm. And that's something I communicate to patients quite a bit. I say, can you quiet the mind long enough to hear what's knocking at your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what needs to change. And so part of the process is, can you hear it? Can you feel it? And then do you have the courage to step into that truth?
Yes. And some of it can be as simple as reframing the words. Instead of calling it like discomfort, oh, it's uncomfortable, I don't like it, it's painful, calling it a longing. Exchanging the word that indicates something as negative to a pull. Something is pulling me. And as you say, it helps to train yourself to sit in the feelings as opposed to either running away from them. And there's lots of ways to run away from them. You know, we can run away from them from being busy all the time, or watching a lot of TVs, or reading a novel. You know, what I love novels, but and I love TV, so I'm not dissing them. But like, instead of stopping and feeling what's going on, we drink, we overeat, we pursue entertainment, we get into really crummy relationships. All the things we do so as not to just sit, listen, reframe what's going on as a call from the soul.
You talk about that as being conscious
through
that period.
Yeah.
To stay awake through, right. There's this moment in Broken Open where you talk about you're standing on the edge of a very dark forest. Mm-hmm. And you know that you might have to go into this very dark forest to have your Phoenix process. Mm-hmm. But can you have faith that when you get to the other side of that dark forest, the most beautiful life you could have ever imagined is going to be there?
Yeah. Well, that image comes from Dante, where he starts his most famous Divine Comedy book with the line, I came to a point in my life where through the path was lost, and I entered a dark woods. And we all come to that point. And this goes back to what we were talking about taking people off pedestals. Somehow we think other people never come to that point in life where the way is lost and everything feels like a dark forest. We think everybody else got some instruction book and their path, they stayed on the path. What's the matter with us? And in our loneliness and our sense that other people somehow got the instruction book and we didn't, we lose out on the support we could get to go into the forest because we're so ashamed to admit to these other people who seem to have the book, like, I'm lost. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. I'm not going to admit that to those other people. They don't get lost, but they do. Everyone does. That's kind of the human operating system. I don't know who came up with this idea that that's a good operating system, but it seems to be we get lost so as to find ourselves. That seems to be the purpose of living. You lose it, and then you apply awake consciousness to the problem so you can finally come home to yourself, and you find a place in you that will never be lost again, no matter what happens. That's the promise of the spiritual path. Can I find that compass inside of me? The needle always points to my true north. Can I find that? Because throughout my life, other woods, dark woods, are going to appear to me. I mean, the ultimate dark woods is we age and we approach death. And if you ask me, that's what all of our dark woods really scare us about. All of our transitions are sort of like hearkening to the big transition that scares us as mortals. But if we can spend our life finding that compass, that true north, it can help us in every frightening transition, including the final one.
So to move to just because this is sort of starting to come up organically in the conversation, your last book was about your sister's battle with cancer and how you gave her your own bone marrow because you were a perfect match for her. Did going through that, can you say for the listeners, because I know actually of listeners who will be listening to this who've just lost dear ones to them, how that Phoenix process transformed you? Mm-hmm. That loss transformed you? Because I think that's the other thing about the Phoenix process. It doesn't just happen once
No.
in our lives.
Sorry to say.
and we actually started the interview talking about your own Phoenix process now, because that's the other thing. The Phoenix process, it can have these times where it's like this quiet unknowingness of what's coming next. And for you as a writer, as someone who's creative, you're in that uncomfortable space of, I don't know exactly what my next message is going to be, but there's such joy when you do have it. When you know, when you have this like deep knowingness of exactly what you're going to be writing about next. So when you don't know, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we go through tiny Phoenix processes, I think, and then these huge, huge life ones. Mm-hmm. Can you just speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah. Well, you're so right that life serves up so many opportunities to practice what we begin to learn when we make the Phoenix process somewhat conscious. It's practice for the next one. And I do want to say it works. If when the first big changes in your life happen, you begin to pay attention to them and ask them, what have you come to teach me? I know there's something embedded in here for me to learn and grow and find more meaning and joy in my life. I hesitate to use the word joy or happiness because people mistake that to mean, and then everything was okay,
Well, and you have this great quote that I was reading this morning that Joseph Campbell says, and Francis Weller says the same thing in the interview I did with him, and this is what strikes me so much about some of the greatest spiritual thinkers, you being one of them to me. All collaborate each other, and you always use the word happy kind of with like a, and not sure if happy is the right word, because even what Joseph Campbell says is the meaning of life, there isn't a meaning of life per se, it's what we want to do is actually really live.
And he says, feel the rapture of being alive. The rapture of being alive. Rapture is a great word because it's very intense and it's got fire in it. So we want to feel the rapture of being alive. I do. So this last experience I went through when I was my sister's perfect match to be a bone marrow donor, because she needed a bone marrow transplant. She had lymphoma. And when you have a blood cancer and it's stage 4 like hers was, the only thing that would save your life is a bone marrow transplant. And it's very hard to find a match, and it's really hard to find what's called a genetically perfect match. And lo and behold, we found one, and it was me, which was kind of funny in the family because my sister and I are very different. And so, wow, we're perfectly matched in blood. We almost are the same being in our blood, but we've been so different across a lifetime as sisters. And that experience that we went through where we tried to heal our relationship before the transplant so that maybe we could teach our cells to get along once my marrow was in her body, because there's this chance that even if she survived the transplant, she still could die if my cells attacked her or her body rejected my cells, rejection and attack. And when we heard those words, rejection and attack, we thought, wow, that's what we've done across a lifetime. And P.S., that's what people do with each other. We reject each other, we attack each other. And we decided we were going to kind of clean up all those big and little incidences in our sisterhood so that by the time my marrow cells got into her body, maybe they could not attack or reject each other. It was a kind of highfalutin woo-woo idea, but when your life is on the line, you'll do anything. And the result was what she called the best year of her life. which was amazing because she very much suffered in that year. But she felt through what we did, she finally came home to herself and really deeply accepted herself. And she said something to me in one of our therapy sessions before the transplant. She said, you know, you don't have to be perfect to be my perfect match. And that, if you ask me, what did I learn during this Phoenix process, was to put down that striving to be perfect, to be a perfect wife, to be a perfect writer, to be a perfect friend, a perfect citizen, and instead to become authentically me with all of my wounds and weirdnesses and neuroses, and to stop this burden of being perfect, because we were perfect for each other all the way to our blood, but we weren't perfect. And, you know, even though my sister died almost 2 years ago now, I felt we reached this place of authentic love like I've never reached with anyone. We were one in blood and in soul, and yet we were different. And that was cool. We could be different yet perfectly matched. And hey, isn't that what you're doing on Fox when you're trying to bring some sort of I see you other human who just has a different opinion? Oh my God, how crazy that our different opinions would drive us to, in some cultures, genocide. In this culture, such disharmony, to the point of sometimes I wonder if we're going to have a civil war again. So what this brought me to with my sister is that we can be different yet perfectly matched.
Did your so beautifully said, did your experience with losing her, was this the hardest death that you've had to grieve in your life?
Yeah, I have made peace with the fact that this rent in my heart will never close. There's no closure here. This is an enormous loss that, you know, there was this beautiful Christian pastor and mystic in Germany, Friedrich Bonhoeffer, who has written beautiful things, and he was murdered by the Nazis because he harbored Jews and spoke of harmony of religion. And he said, the gap when you lose someone, you should never try to close that gap, because by keeping the gap open, you remain in communion with love and with the other person on whatever level that means to you. So I practice keeping the gap open and not seeking closure. I think closure is a ridiculous concept.
I'm so happy you said. I've told my patients there for years, I hate the word closure.
Yeah.
I hate it. I don't believe in it. I think it's silly. I
Yeah.
don't want closure. I don't want closure. And so many, I want a greater understanding of myself and others. But the word closure has never sat well with me. You write a letter and then you send it and it's closure. I'm not going to think about that person anymore. I think that's a cutting off of the self and of other and of the potential to still experience great love through great loss.
Yes, I that's beautifully said. I always say, wear your grief as a badge of love, a badge of how well you have loved. Like in the old days, the women would wear black for a year, let's say, after someone important died. And the townspeople would look and go, oh, yes, she loved so well. Look at her. Her tears are a proof of her love and attachment. I also don't like this idea of being unattached as a sign of your spiritual realization, that you're not attached to anything. Whatever. I'm very attached to the people I love. That doesn't mean I completely fall apart when they die or when a friendship ends, but I mourn the loss because it meant so much to me. You can carry on quite well with a heart that stays open in grief. In fact, I believe you carry on better. There's more room in a heart that's open to everything. There's room for more love, more connection. Because one of the things that stops people from connecting with each other is that we're afraid we'll lose them. So I'm not going to give my heart away. What if you take the love away? So there's a lot of mistrust, and so we keep the heart closed. No, open to whatever comes, even loss, because there's great learning and expansion in loss.
So the spiritual warriorship there is not to fear the loss, like that anticipatory anxiety of fearing the loss.
Correct.
And that goes back to what you think that a lot of our, I don't know if you use the word neurosis, is throughout our lives is really about the great death that we're all going to experience, aging and death.
Yeah.
To do what you say, though, I think people need to understand that they have to practice having a tender heart, to living with an incredibly tender heart.
Yeah.
And even when I say that, my heart starts to beat a little fast, right? Like we all think of our hearts as tender, and it's like a little newborn baby. Those tender, like it's about keeping your heart very soft and supple. My
favorite book about keeping the heart tender is by a Tibetan Buddhist, Chogyam Trungpa, his name is Trungpa, and it's called Shambhala, the Path of the Sacred Warrior. Now, very brave young man when he led many, many hundreds of Tibetans over the Himalayas in the winter. Many died on the journey to escape the communist Chinese, who were going to destroy all the Tibetan Buddhists, especially someone like him who was a holy man, even though he was very young. He led his people over the mountains. Really brave guy. Then he got to India, and then the Dalai Lama sent him and a few other young Tibetans to the West to teach, totally out of his element. Can you imagine being raised in like Tibet, where it was practically an ancient culture, no input from the outside world, and suddenly he's in New York City? And his whole teaching was, and he's very intellectual, smart guy, English second language, and a poet writing in English. His whole teaching was, keep your heart soft and open. That is the sign of warriorship. You think it's brave people shut their hearts and get all strong? No. That may look brave, that may look Hollywood brave, like the John Wayne, Schwarzenegger, like, oh, I'll be back, that kind of thing. No, the brave people are the tender people who risk feeling even at the cost of loss. Those are the brave people. And if you ask me, that's what our world needs today. And that's why I put so much stock in women being proud about our capacity to feel and to love and to nurture, because that's what the world needs now. We need the strong nurturer. The proud, noble nurturer is the archetype we need now. Maybe we needed the proud warrior on the horse in the past who would explore and conquer. Maybe that God had a great plan with that. But what we need now is the proud, strong nurturer.
I think that if there's one thing the one thing I always tell my patients that I want them to leave with, because I'm also very against how much we over-medicate people. I think it's one of the biggest human travesties of my time, and definitely my field. And we over-medicate them, and why it's such a problem for me is because then they don't feel this exact crucial thing that we're talking about in this episode today, which is that you don't feel the tenderness of your heart in the same way. You become afraid of experiencing the great love because you're too scared to feel the great loss.
Beautiful. Perfect. And of course, Medication has saved many people I know from a life of enormous anxiety, crippling anxiety. So, of course, we know it has its purpose. But in medicating children, just because they can't sit still, or in medicating people who are just feeling what you said, the very true anxiety of being human, of being mortal. To medicate that fear away is to medicate away the potential to awaken.
So the question then always comes to me through them, which is, well, why? And so we've just sort of explained the why, but then how?
Yeah.
Right? So there's the why and the how. So we've just explained why we feel like people should do this. But I think we haven't really been able to teach people on a huge level, because the counter teachings we're getting from every place we look in our society is happiness, go for happiness, self-medicate, actually medicate, shop, eat, sex, social media, to distract yourself from actually how you can productively grieve.
Well, I think to a huge extent, the why is the how.
Yes, so that's what I wanted to ask. So even in light of the loss that you just faced with your sister, how do you do it?
Well, I want to say, again, understanding the why is the how. Mm-hmm. I can give you all sorts of techniques. I can talk about meditation. I can talk about psychotherapy. I can talk about keeping the body strong. And I will, if you'd like. But those are helpful. They've helped me. But what's helped me the most is understanding the why. Because the why of consumer culture, let's call it, like get more things will make you happy. Be more beautiful and young, get face work because that will make you happy. It's disrupting that storyline through a different why, a different story of what really makes human beings feel the rapture of being alive, retelling the story about what a noble, good, true human being is. One who can feel, one who gives, one who values emotional intelligence as much as rational intelligence, one who values the strength of kindness as much as the strength of aggression. Retelling the story to our young people, to ourselves, over and over until our value system changes, is just as important as learning meditation practices, breathing, how to sit in the pain long enough so that it teaches us something, how to keep our bodies strong and healthy and open and clean so that we can hear the voice of the soul instead of like eating so much and covering so much through drink and eating. Psychotherapy, to me, is part of a spiritual path. Whose voice is inside me telling me I should do X, Y, and Z? Is that my voice? No, it's my mom. No, it's my dad. Mm-hmm. No, it's the culture. No, it's racism. No, it's sexism. Like identifying the voices. That's a long psychotherapeutic path that to me is holy and important and just as noble as going to the gym and strengthening your body, going to the psyche gym with your therapist, your trainer. I could spend hours telling you the how of that, but there's lots of how out there. There's lots of how to. Meditate, psychotherapy, take care of your body. Try those 3 things on for the next 25 years, and it will make a big dent. But I'm more interested in changing the story of what a noble, strong human being is.
Mm-hmm. And I think even when I hear this story, for me, that hearing, especially in Broken Open, you did that, right? And you don't do that just through your own story and by giving us language to understand and tell ourselves a different narrative. You give us lots of stories from other people who have had to make it through really hard times.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's not necessarily a book on, at the end you talk about a little toolbox on how to do those practical things. But what you really do is you try to sort of play a song or a melody through the words over and over again that we can listen to, saying, this is a new story we need to tell. And I'm going to tell it to you a bunch of times so you get it. So you understand why this is so important that we suffer. Because even as you talk about it, I feel a resistance to it. And this is what I teach people how to do.
What do you feel a resistance to?
Well, I think naturally, right, and again, I think I'm sort of a baby on the spiritual path, but
me too.
And I'm a lot like probably many of the listeners. I'm still that girl on the other side of the couch sometimes going, why? Why? If I don't have to suffer, why? Even though I know why, my higher conscious self knows why. There's always that, ugh, right? I don't want to go through the fire. I don't want to. Like a little kid saying, like, please, like.
Well, let me give you we'll end with a little piece of hope about that, okay?
Okay.
And I'm going to try to make it sound not kind of like woo-woo, because it really isn't, but
I love the woo-woo.
Like what Buddha said, there's been thousands of years of trying to make something sound very simple, yet it comes off as complex. But it is very simple. It's that if you accept that the ground rules here on planet Earth are about death and rebirth, and that in death there's suffering. Just take a look. It's spring now, as you and I are speaking. It was a really hard winter here. We had storms that brought trees down. It's kind of a mess outside as I look outside my window now. But look, the grass is turning green and little daffodil shoots are coming up again. And it's so wonderful, and I love it. But if I get attached to spring, and then summer comes, and then fall and winter, and every change of season I go through like despair, and no, I want spring, I want summer. Like, okay, that is a very painful way to live. But if you can accept that this is the rules of life, it happens to the daffodil, and it happens to you, human being. You are a daffodil. You will sprout, you will grow, you will bloom, you will wither, you will die, you will lay fallow, you will come up again. Some people can swear that that happens to your soul when it actually dies. So let go of the fear and the no. Like, first of all, your no has absolutely zero power.
Yeah.
So it's very futile. It's a waste of energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you say yes to all the changes, because guess what? They're going to happen whether you say yes or no. And the hopeful thing is the more you can say yes, the more your life is so free.
And accepting doesn't necessarily mean surrendering, right? I mean, because I think people attach the word surrender to giving up. I actually love the word surrender because for me it means we suffer when we don't surrender to a beautiful concept that you bring up in Marrow, which is, and I forget what it was called. It's about fate, but it's in a different language.
Yes, it's called amor fati. It's Latin and it means love of fate. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what you're speaking to right now, isn't it? That you have to accept this fate.
Yeah, but notice the word isn't accept fate. It's love your fate, which is a little twist. Accepting your fate kind of feels like life's a bitch and then you die. But love of fate is, wow, what a wild and crazy thing this being human is. Who thought of this situation we're in? But here I am. I'm going to love it. All of it, even the terror. I'm going to try to love it. I'm not going to accept it. That sounds so drudgery. I'm going to love it. I'm going to be a spiritual warrior. I'm going to ride through it, eyes wide open, come what may. And when people say, yeah, but isn't that surrender? The only thing I can say is try it. You've had a life of trying the opposite, of resisting. Now try to go toward it with love and a sense of curiosity. Try it. Try it for the next year and see what happens. See if surrender means giving up your sense of self and purpose and drive. P.S. It doesn't, but find that out for yourself by doing it.
Someone in recovery said to me, and I wonder if this is an AA phrase or just from him because he's brilliant, but he said, eat it like you ordered it.
I love that. I don't know if it's an AA phrase, but whatever it is, it's amor fati. That's exactly what it means. Eat it like you ordered it.
Like you ordered it.
Yeah.
I just have one last question before we go. Is there anyone that you haven't met yet at Omega that's come to Omega or through your world travels that you are a few people that you would still really like to have a conversation with?
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, yes.
Except I'm kind of like, I often say I don't want to meet him because I want to have at least one person on a pedestal. And he still is up there for me because I go to as many of his live concerts as I can and have for years. And it is church for me. And he gives me so much. I don't want to know anything else. I just want to keep him up there as Bruce the Godhead.
It's so amazing you said that, Elizabeth, because I saw Bruce for the first time this past summer in New Jersey. And I posted on Facebook, if there's ever a spiritual experience, it's seeing Bruce Springsteen in concert. And I think that man has a way of channeling some sort of collective, conscious energy.
Absolutely.
That's
the audience is comprised of so many different kinds of people with different ideas and worldviews and jobs, where you'll be sitting next to a cop from Newark and a professor from New York City, and everybody's in it, all ages, colors, backgrounds, beliefs, and he brings everyone together in joy and power. So I don't think I want to meet him. I want to keep him up there on the stage.
Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm beyond grateful. And I hope that this is only goodbye to say hello again.
Me too.
For more information on Elizabeth and her work, go to elizabethlesser.com. And right now, I encourage you all to take a look at the courses offered at Omega. I studied there. It's beautiful. The retreat center is literally a little piece of heaven on earth. It's on a 250-acre campus. There's a lake for swimming, there's wonderful food, and a gorgeous library, just to name a few of the things you'll find there, along with the most well-known spiritual teachers of our time. So check it out at www.eomega.org. That's EOMEGA.org. They also have a large selection of online courses.